topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I am a core alignment coach, which means I coach individuals, groups, organizations into helping them remember their values and to align their actions with their values so that we walk our talk. I am a diversity educator and I have been for a long time. And I am an emotional wisdom training specialist because I find that it's very important as human beings to understand and recognize when our emotions are trying to signal something for us and for us to pay attention to them and take wisdom from them, not get stuck in them, but also honor them. So there is a lot to emotional wisdom training that's really beneficial, I think, for everyone. I have a guest who we're having a lot of technical difficulties. It may be that it's just me. Well, my guest is hoping to join me, but if not, we will have her back sometime. But I wanted to first introduce her by the title that she offered for the show tonight. And again, we'll do it another time if we can't get her tonight. Her name is Cassandra Flipper. And she wanted to call this show Black History is American History. We are having a series of shows this month to honor Black history, which I try to honor year round. I don't just save it for this month, but of course we want to recognize how important it is for others to focus on it if it's not part of your normal part of your life. And Cassandra Flipper is the niece of Henry Ossian Flipper, Ossin. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Also known as Henry O. Flipper, second lieutenant. He was the first African-American graduate of the military academy at West Point. I want to point out that he was not the first student. He was not the first African-American cadet. He was the first one, let me put it mildly, who was allowed to graduate. And the only reason I know this is because I volunteered at a Juneteenth amazing several-day weekend this past summer with my daughter to help the speakers and guests and artists and great achievers in many fields at a Juneteenth celebration, celebrating the wide diversity in African-American culture, community leaders. And there was a table there set up by like a living history group of representing the Buffalo Soldiers and the 10th Cavalry. And at that table, I learned so much just talking to the historians there, Trooper William Terrell, who I think is still the president of this chapter in Northern California, a great educator. He and other members are educating schools. It looks like I'm going to interrupt myself because it looks like we have our guests over the phone. So it looks like we can get audio, which would be fantastic. Is that correct, DJ? I'm asking my engineer. Okay, working on it. Okay, great. We might have her join me. but she herself, and we've had a couple of conversations. So Trooper Terrell introduced me to Cassandra Flipper, and Trooper Terrell is actually the son of a Buffalo Soldier himself. Just phenomenal, meeting people who are just incredibly knowledgeable about their history and educating others, which is just also a great honor to learn. And Cassandra herself had to attend a segregated elementary school. By the time she was in high school, she had, what should I say, the opportunity to go to a desegregated school. So she herself can imagine what her uncle went through, being the first Black graduate of West Point. And one of the pieces of stories that she will share is that no one, all the other cadets were white students, and none of them during that entire education spoke to who became Lieutenant Henry Flipper. And Cassandra, did I hear you? I'm just going to pause for a minute. Okay, I will wait. I won't pause for a whole minute. Okay, I misunderstood. So I am trying to represent stories that Cassandra could tell so incredibly well. And so I was learning actually from Trooper Terrell that the first African-American student who successfully made it through all the classes was prevented from graduating. Not only the cruelty was not only not being spoken to by any of the other students because they were all white, and it was the cultural norm to isolate, segregate, cut off, demean, ignore. But I believe Trooper Terrell said he was actually physically blocked. And I kept trying to find this. It's just not in the textbooks, which is related to the title of the show, Black History is American History, because there are still so much omitted from the textbooks. So Cassandra shares lessons that she learned from her Uncle Henry. She refers to him as her Uncle Henry. And one of them was how imagining the courage and the stamina and the drive and the determination to continue and to pursue despite the mistreatment and the abuse. He got through the academy, graduated. He joined, which was already apparently famed, Buffalo Soldiers, which was a segregated regiment. And he also became the first African-American to lead this regiment of enlisted men who were all Black. He also, there's a movie sort of reenacting parts of his life, and you can find that. You can find that up on YouTube. I also want to turn to the title that Cassandra named because of the incredibly, for some of it's shocking, for some people it's not, decision of the governor in Florida to stop African American history to be included, to stop AP history courses in Black history. And oh, look, we have Cassandra. Yay. You made it. I see that you just need to unmute your mic. Thank you so much for your efforts. I appreciate it. You did not give up. Yay, welcome.
Well,
Thank you for
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I have I was trying to share some of the things that you share with me, but it's so nice to have you here. And how about you letting people know? We have some viewers and we have some listeners who can hear on the radio. We know that you're a retired lawyer who lives in the Bay Area, and I know you call Lieutenant Flipper. You refer to him as your Uncle Henry. Is he? Are you the niece or grandniece of Lieutenant Flipper?
It's really great grandniece.
Oh, it is.
Henry was the older brother of my great grandfather. So
Okay.
I don't think we have a common term for that, but I think of him as my great granduncle.
Okay. I love the way you call him Uncle Henry.
Everyone in the family, regardless of what generation, refers to him as Uncle Henry.
Totally makes sense. I know when we first met through Trooper Terrell, who I met at a Juneteenth exhibit about the Buffalo Soldiers, one of the things you were sharing was lessons you learned from your Uncle Henry about what it's like to be a first. And can you take that?
I think there's so many African Americans who were first and who continue to be firsts. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah.
And in one way or another, each one of those firsts has some of the experiences that Uncle Henry had. Maybe not quite as severe, but it's some version of the same phenomenon, being the first, being alone, not having someone who can give you the secrets of the organization and what works and what doesn't work, which is so important to becoming a part of any group of human beings, whether it's at school or in a job or in a neighborhood, whatever. But Uncle Henry, who was born in 1856, was the oldest of 5 boys born in Thomasville, Georgia, in slavery. And his father and mother put the boys, who were then living, I think, only 2 or 3, in a wagon and drove up to Atlanta, where his father, who was a bootmaker and saddle maker, started working for the Army, which had worked its way down to Atlanta. And so from a very young age, his family was emancipated at that point, though he had been born in slavery. But at a young age, he was exposed to the Army. And I'm sure that had a lot to do with why he ended up going to West Point eventually.
That makes sense. And you go ahead.
So you were asking about what it is to be a first. Uncle Henry was not the first African American at West Point, but he was the first one to graduate because he had the temperament and the patience, as well as the intelligence, to persevere in an atmosphere that was hostile. None of his fellow cadets spoke to him for the entire 4 years he was there. Based on what I've read, however, there were African Americans, then called Negroes or colored folks, who worked in the kitchen and in the gardens and in and around the academy, who did speak to him, so that he wasn't isolated in the absolute sense. So he had people he could talk with and joke with and not feel so all alone, even though his classmates didn't speak to him.
Wow, I'm really glad to hear that. It's so nice that he had some community.
Well, I think that's critical for all of us. And I suppose that it's probably a very basic lesson that any, quote, first in a job or in a school learns, that there's some folks around. They may not be folks in power, they may not be your peers, but there are some folks around with whom you can communicate and maybe get some inside information, which I'm sure he did from the workers.
That's such a good point about inside information, because that is certainly a way to keep excluding people if that is not shared.
Typically it is. You don't know what to do. You don't know. You can make mistakes so easily when you don't have the cues. So anyway, he persevered, and he did graduate, and he graduated in 1877. So you can see how long ago that was. And his first assignment was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where he was the commanding officer of Troop A of the Buffalo Soldiers. Those were the African American soldiers.
Yeah.
And how they got that name is not certain, but the, I suppose, reasonable supposition is that the Native Americans who saw most of these brown-skinned men with bushy hair reminded them of the buffalo, as well as their bravery, which the buffalo was respected highly among Native Americans. And so they were honored in a way to be called Buffalo Soldiers.
I think Trooper Terrell shared that theory as well. That
right. It's just a theory.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure. But anyway, that was his first assignment at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And with the 10th Cavalry. What's your next question?
Well, tell us about the award that the Academy now, years later, retroactively, now honor Lieutenant Flipper every year at graduation.
Well,
let us know about that.
At graduation every year at West Point, a certain number of the faculty members, who I guess form a special committee, select a graduating cadet who exemplifies some of the characteristics that Henry Flipper exhibited in terms of courage, being able and willing to overcome obstacles that might discourage the average person, and to do so with dignity and grace. The one year that I had the honor of presenting that award at West Point, the faculty members had selected a young white cadet, graduating cadet. It didn't have to be a person of color to receive it, who had contracted cancer early on while attending the academy, and he had to drop out for a year or so to heal, and but he came back and finished. And so his willingness to do that, the strength that he mustered to do that, and the psychological determination earned him that award. So that's one way in which Uncle Henry is honored. And also there's a bust of Uncle Henry in the library at West Point. Might not otherwise hear about it. So that's quite an honor, which he
Yeah, it
richly
is.
deserves. I might mention that, at least in terms of things that have happened in recent years, while it wasn't his first assignment, on his second assignment, he was sent to Texas, and he served under a commanding officer who was a very difficult man named William Shafter, Colonel William Shafter. And he didn't particularly like Henry Flipper. And he was, I guess, first given the job of being the bursar, taking care of the money on the fort. And he was accused of having stolen money, $2,000, which in today's money would be a lot more.
Mhm.
His friends in the unit, as well as some of the community people who knew Uncle Henry, gathered the $2,000 and replaced it. He had no idea what had happened to it, but the money was replaced. But nevertheless, Colonel Shafter felt that Uncle Henry had not behaved properly, and he was dishonorably discharged for conduct unbecoming an officer. So that was in 1882. He had only graduated in 1877, so he really didn't have that many years as an active officer. And it was really distressing to not only him and his family, but his fellow officers and people in the community there, who realized that Colonel Shafter was the kind of guy who, if he didn't like you, he was going to find a way to get rid of you. And that's basically what happened. For many years after that, Uncle Henry, however, was a very productive guy. He worked in Arizona, where he used his engineering degree, which is basically what they get at West Point. And he also learned Spanish. He was fluent in Spanish.
Wow.
And he translated a lot of legal documents, actually. Other than Uncle Henry, I'm the only other lawyer in the family, so I got maybe some of that talent from him. But in any case, he worked for a long time there. He also did a lot of work in Mexico and in Venezuela as an engineer and translator. And so he had a very productive life professionally, despite having been discharged unfairly. And when he retired, he moved back to Atlanta and lived with my great-grandfather, who was a bishop in the AME church. And he continued his efforts to have his discharge reversed. The original court-martial was in 1881. So after a lot of effort from a lot of people, including the law firm of Arnold and Porter in Washington, D.C. Some of your listeners may have heard of Arnold and Porter. They're a big law firm. I think they're still operating. And finally, the application was favorably reviewed by the Army, and it went to the Department of Justice, which recommended Uncle Henry for a pardon. And so Bill Clinton pardoned him on February the 19th, 1999. So it took 118 years
Wow.
for him to be reinstated to the military.
Wow.
And it's sad because it didn't happen during his lifetime, but so many of his relatives were able to find some solace in President Clinton's action.
Well, it's amazing that the unfair, dishonorable discharge did not deter him from being a very industrious, proactive human being, engineer, a translator. He just continued to serve and work and travel.
Yes, he did. He did. And I think that's a lesson for African Americans, for women, for people of all ethnic groups. When they encounter injustice for whatever reason, but particularly because of your gender or because of your sexual orientation or whatever the reason, it's really important not to let that be the end of the story. Even if you can't win your appeal, many times people are fired unjustly and they file complaints, lawsuits that don't succeed. It's important to keep your dignity and your self-confidence and to keep on going. I think the only sad thing that I can think of with regard to Uncle Henry is that he never married. And I think the experience that he had, my own personal opinion is that the experience he had at West Point, at not being able to establish relationships with his fellow cadets, had something to do with that. His inability to establish the kind of relationship that one needs to if you even decide to get married, even if it doesn't work. I think that's a sad thing about his life that I don't know that is mentioned particularly, but I do think it's a sad thing about his life. He lived it alone. He had, family rumors are that he had plenty of girlfriends, but he did not get married.
Well, let's show a photo of him now. Our sound engineer DJ has found two photos. There you go.
Good-looking guy, huh?
Yeah, handsome man. Like that dignity and determination. And there's another one.
Yes.
How old do you think he was? That must have been, I don't know if it says on the photo, but.
How old was he at the time? Well, let's see. He graduated in 1877, and he was born in 1856. So he was probably 21 years old when those photos were taken.
Yeah. Wow, I'm curious how he got to Venezuela. Like, what was the connection to Venezuela? Do you have any idea?
He was working with oil companies. He was working with oil companies in the U.S. as well as in Mexico. And I don't know for a fact, but based on what I've read, that's how he eventually got to Venezuela, because of their oil industry.
Well, I really appreciate what you said, how your encouraging statement about how when people are discriminated against, that is not the end of the story, to just keep on going and find community. Like community makes all so much difference, right? With the moral support and the connection and the, whether someone's on the inside and share secrets or not, just having community is so huge. And I'd love to hear more. I mean, you're a lawyer. What was it like for you? I don't imagine there were the majority of your class were female when you were studying law, or that the majority of class were African American. Can you share a little bit about your experience? And
When I was in law school, I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and there were 2 Black men in my class, and there were, at least at one point, 12 women in our class out of a couple of hundred.
what out of okay.
And the women, of course, stuck together pretty well. We did not have lockers in the area of the law school building where all the men had lockers, but we had a dressing room or a restroom where we gathered between classes, traded outlines and notes and hints about how to succeed in various classes, and helped each other as much as we could. I did not belong to a study group. I suppose in law school they still do that. That's very helpful to study with other people because there's so much coming at you and so much that is new. And so the women in the law school when I was there helped each other a lot. Today it's different. Fortunately, there are many, many more women in law school, and many more opportunities to become a part of study groups. I'm sure where they're either women or it's men and women together. I'm sure it varies based on what I've heard. And as far as being a person of color, the 2 guys who were in my class, and they were there were no other Black students in the law school when I was there other than the 3 of us. We tried to not form a clique. We were friendly with each other, but it did not seem prudent at the time to always be seen together, and people would get suspicious and who knows what. So we were friendly with each other, but we kind of kept our difference. And one of the guys was married, so that was easy enough. And otherwise, we didn't really hang out together, the 3 of us. But it was hard. One funny story I'll tell you is that I heard that the FBI was interviewing. This is when I was a third-year law student, and the FBI sent the director of the St. Louis office to our campus to give a presentation by way of recruiting. And I approached him as he went into the doorway of the room where he was going to give his presentation. And I asked him why they weren't considering any women. And he laughed at me and he said, "Oh, you're way too short." That was his response.
Wow.
And I said, "Well, today that's not a problem. If a woman wants to join, wants to become an FBI agent, height isn't necessarily a problem. And they do hire a lot of women lawyers, unlike in my day. But I had my revenge because my first job out of law school was with the U.S. Department of Justice. I worked in the Civil Rights Division. And there were many times when I had to supervise FBI agents in investigations that were assigned to me. So I got my revenge.
Sweet.
Whether I was too short or not, I don't know.
Your height did not get in the way?
My height did not get in the way.
Remarkable. And it's, I mean, how sad that back to you're sharing that you and the two other students who were Black couldn't hang out because of like incredible double standards, because white people could hang out as much as they wanted to with no fear of being seen as a clique, with no fear of being suspected. It's sad that you couldn't be, community if you wanted to more. Which I mean, even when I went to college, people were still saying things like, "Oh, why are all the Black kids sitting at the table together?" Like, how about the rest of us?
Yes.
That incredible. I don't know what to call it. Inability.
Well, I mean, fortunately today, I think that kind of thing isn't a problem. I mean, this was back in the 60s and, it was 1960s. And so it was very different. Happily, it's changed.
There has been a lot. I agree, has changed, but still so much, still not enough.
Still not enough. But I'm so proud of so many college and graduate students today who stand up for people who are discriminated against in one way or another, and who go out and demonstrate and petition and testify before Congress and do the things that, it just makes me proud of them. Whether it's an issue about discrimination or an issue about guns, whatever the issue is, that young people do feel empowered, and they are respected by most of our political leaders. Not all, but most.
Right. Well, speaking of political leaders, I love the title that you chose for the show, Black History is American History. And we have just about 5 minutes left, and I'd love to give you the opportunity to just say more about how true that is and how ignorant it is to omit what finally was beginning to be included in American history.
Exactly. I think the governor of Florida is sadly misguided. But I also want to say something, great about Lloyd Austin, who's the Secretary of Defense.
That's right.
The first Black person to be Secretary of Defense. I'm really proud of him. And he made some mention early on, soon after his appointment, of Uncle Henry. And, it just makes me proud every day when I see him doing what is a very, very difficult job, I'm sure, especially when it comes to the Ukraine and what's happening there. It's really satisfying to see that a Black man has that position and is highly regarded, not only in the United States, but around the world. And what I think is interesting is that there is a connection with Uncle Henry, aside from pure race. Even though Lloyd Austin was born in Mobile, Alabama, he was actually raised in Thomasville, Georgia, which is where Uncle Henry was born. Now, I've never met Secretary Austin, and I've never had a chance to talk to him about that. But if I did meet him, that's one thing I'd like to ask him about a little bit. And so that, to me, that's one example, that Black history is American history. Here is a Black man in a critical position right now. Our country depends on him in many ways. Our president depends on him. The armed services certainly depend on him.
Absolutely.
And I think if we think about the Army, or if we think about baseball, or we think about football, I mean, we've got the what is it called? The battle between the two top football teams coming up in a couple of weeks, and they're two black quarterbacks for the first time in history. It took a long time for us to get even one black quarterback, but now we have two black quarterbacks in the championship game, which is kind of cool. The somewhat sad part about it is that the struggles that Black people have had to endure and continue to endure are being endured by other groups. And so that's the sad part of that statement. Immigrants from Latin America, immigrants from Asia, people who are gay or lesbian are having these same struggles. And certainly my hope and prayer is that we learn how to address all of these differences in a way that is deserving of our national aspirations. And so that's what I mean when I say Black history is American history, because so many other groups are going through exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to struggle as a society to overcome our prejudices and to accept everyone.
Beautifully stated. Thank you so much for your closing thoughts. We are actually at the end of the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Really appreciate your being here. I appreciate there was a comment from someone watching us on Facebook. I think it was Don Faust, who said he really, that many great lessons from this conversation. So thank you for bringing those forward and for sharing. Love to have you back sometime. And I also want to thank everyone who tuned in by radio or one of the video platforms. And thank you to our engineer, DJ, and our producer, Dean. And be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern at Talk4TV or W4CY.com. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week. Thank you all for listening.
Inarticulate speech.